everyone, to the Over Under Movies podcast, the show where we take a prominent figure or franchise in the world of filmmaking and ask the simple question, are they overrated or are they underrated? I'm joined as always by my good friend and co-host. He is the Eric Draven to my The Crow that guides Eric Draven in the movie that we're talking about today.
To the failed prop gun?
No. We'll get to that. We've given some pretty significant clues as to what we're talking about. The movie The Crow, which came out in the year 1994.
Wow, 1994.
1994. It's an old movie.
Good year, 30 years ago.
Almost as old as us. It's directed by Alex Proyas, and it's based on a comic book series by James O'Barr. It famously stars Brandon Lee in his final role because he died on this set. That's going to be one of the main talking points about this movie. It's what a lot of people remember about this movie, but it's The Crow. Dylan, why are we talking about this?
Talking about it because there is a remake coming out this week. If you're listening to this, it came out this past weekend. It is also called The Crow. It is basically the same story from the original comic that they're doing once again, this time starring Bill Skarsgård and FKA Twigs. Is that how you pronounce her name?
Yep.
You just spell it out like that. They're playing the same characters of Eric Draven and his girlfriend Shelley, who are murdered in a break-in, and he is risen a year later to take his vengeance against the murderers, and he becomes this gothic superhero called the Crow, and he has a mystical crow that follows him around, and he's basically invincible, and that's his main superpower. It's kind of a silly idea for a superhero, but it's a film that is very widely revered by people for several reasons, but probably, if you're talking about the trivia facts of this movie, this is the movie where Brandon Lee died. Brandon Lee is, of course, the son of Bruce Lee, so his dad's a lot more famous than he is. And unfortunately, Brandon Lee didn't really get a chance to become a famous actor because, like his dad, he died really young.
Yep, and on set, it's like a curse that ran through that family. Yeah, so this is The Crow. It's a comic book movie. It's one of the earlier comic book movies. There were other ones before this, like Superman, Tim Burton's Batman.
I think, the Burton Batman was probably the biggest influence for this aesthetic.
Yeah. And for the fact that this got made, it was probably off the back of the success of those Batman films.
You had never seen this before, right?
I had not.
So we watched it for the first time last weekend. What did you think of it, having now seen it?
So I get why people like it. There's an aesthetic that's still distinct. Something that I said in my review of it, which you can read on Letterboxd, is that it's both super dated and super ahead of its time. This thing looks like a Linkin Park music video or an Evanescence music video. It looks like, nu metal from 2001, but it came out in 1994. So it feels super old to be watching now, but at the same time, it must have been so cutting edge when it came out. The aesthetic is the main thing that I think makes it stand out against other just superhero movies or revenge movies. It's got a really unique style that I think a lot of subcultures are drawn to. This had influence on how goth people would dress and how metalheads would dress.
A lot of 90s bands.
Yeah. And of course, this style was influenced by 80s metal bands and music as well. So it's definitely left its mark on culture because of the style, which I admire. I thought that the performances were okay. I thought Brandon Lee was good.
Yeah, he's kind of hamming it up, which I think really helps the film. That it's difficult to tell how campy he's trying to be with it, but I think it's a good performance overall.
Yeah, it's tough because I don't know about you, but I haven't seen any other Brandon Lee performance to compare it against, so who's to say? But it's almost like he's doing John Wick by way of Heath Ledger's Joker, which is obviously a cool mashup of personalities. So I see why so many people were drawn to this. I think there's a South Park joke where it's like a Halloween party and everyone wants to be the Crow or something like that. Yeah, this was a very popular Halloween costume throughout the 90s, and I feel like it's been semi-forgotten. It's definitely a cult classic, but the people in my circles don't really talk about this movie, and the remake has not really gotten any buzz.
The remake's probably not good also. The embargo for the film is basically up when it comes out Thursday night, which is always a terrible sign.
Yeah.
If a movie is good, you want the embargo to lift as early as possible.
Yeah, you want people talking about it.
Yeah, because you want the good reviews to come out, and so everybody's like, holy shit, this movie has 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. We got to go see it this weekend.
And I haven't even seen like a trailer for this movie. I don't think it played before Trap, which I saw recently.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of movies in theaters recently.
Yeah, and you haven't seen it because this is playing at our local AMC.
So it's like got a wide release.
But our AMC did not promote it at all.
That's not a good sign.
Yeah, but yeah, I wasn't super familiar with this movie or franchise. Dylan, what was your first exposure to it?
I watched it for the first time when I was in college, and I don't know, I was going down some sort of like YouTube rabbit hole of Hollywood accidents or something like that. And I remember it being like kind of boring. It was like a movie that I watched late at night one night, and I didn't remember anything about it. Funny enough, like on rewatch, like I kind of appreciate it more. I think it's structured fairly well. It's this weird sort of like non-linear storytelling where when they get attacked and murdered, that's like a flashback sequence that happens. Like if you were writing the story of this movie linearly, you would do, okay, you introduce this guy and his girlfriend, you get a sense of their relationship with each other, and then maybe they get killed like 10, 15 minutes into the movie or something like that. You build up to it first. But this film, it just throws you right into the middle of it. And you said that it was like a little kind of schizophrenic a little bit, the way that it was edited together.
Right, because those flashbacks are always shown with like a very bright lit filter on it that's kind of fuzzy. There's a lot of like strobe-like effects when they're doing the flashbacks and really frantic editing. Kind of grating. I wouldn't recommend this to my friends who have epilepsy or anything like that.
This is the ultimate epilepsy warning.
Do not watch this movie. Yeah, I found that to be a little grating, but I do agree that the actual like use of it as a framing device was good because his goal is to like hunt down all these gangsters that killed him and his girlfriend, and then as he like meets them or tracks them down, the film kind of like flashes back to that person's role in the assassination. So it's cool. You got to wonder how much of that like frantic editing and the framing device is because of Brandon Lee's death. So he died while they were shooting the flashback scene.
Yes.
Which might explain why it's so like distorted, fuzzy looking, why it's edited up so much.
Yeah, because you can like hardly tell what's happening in those flashback sequences. It's so frenetic.
Yeah, so, I wonder if Brandon Lee hadn't died, like, would this movie just be told in order? Or do you think even in the first pass of the script, there was always the flashbacks?
Yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, looking at the rest of the film, I'd have to guess that most of it is pretty intentional. And the fact that he died, like, pretty late into the shoot also. It's not like he died early on and they were stuck having to like cut around him or anything like that, or use body doubles and stuff like that. I'm sure they had to do a little bit of that, but not nearly as much as they would have if he had gotten killed like a week into shooting. Like they probably just recast at that point.
Gotten a new guy, yeah. So he died with 3 days left for him to shoot. The production was going to go longer, but he was going to be wrapped in 3 days. They did have to use a body double. It was Chad Stahelski, the director of John Wick. He got his start, I think, in this movie as a stunt actor.
Yeah, he was a stunt man for years and years and years, and a stunt coordinator, and he was Keanu's stunt double in The Matrix. But
he got his start here, and then they did use like digital reimaging on his face for like 1 or 2 scenes to finish up Brandon Lee's performance.
Have you looked up like at all like the details surrounding like how he was killed?
Yeah, so they were using a gun, a real gun.
Using a real gun.
Yeah. They had previously used the gun for a close-up, and when you do a close-up of guns, for some reason they're like, we need to have a real bullet in here.
Well, it's because specifically it was a revolver. And so for a revolver, when you go to load it, it needs to look like it has bullets in it, or else... if you could just see through the little holes in the revolver, you'll see that it's not loaded. It won't look good in the film.
So they had to have bullets in there. They didn't have to, but they did. So the prop crew, they like loaded the powder out of the bullets so that they ostensibly wouldn't fire. They didn't take everything out that they were supposed to. Someone was shooting off the gun.
What happened was that they shot like a dummy round that had no gunpowder or trigger mechanism, but it had the bullet tip, the actual part that shoots out of the gun, and that was lodged in the barrel of the gun, and whoever's job it was, the armorer or whatever, they didn't check that. They didn't check that the barrel was clear.
Yep.
And so they went and loaded it with a blank afterwards, and a blank is basically the inverse. The blank has
It's
an
just the
activation.
power,
It has
yeah.
gunpowder, but it doesn't have a bullet tip.
Yep.
And so those two things
combined equal a bullet.
made a bullet. And when he was walking through the door, he had like a bag of groceries, I think, or something like that, and he just gets shot as he's coming through the door. And it's one of the actual like thug actors in the movie. That guy's the one that pulled the trigger, and I was watching like behind the scenes footage, and that guy was just scarred for life. He's dead now. That guy was like, this is an interview from like 2005 or something, and he's still clearly like wasn't over the fact that he murdered somebody on a film set.
He quit acting for 1 year, and then even like 15 years later, he gave an interview, and he said he still has nightmares about that day. So yeah, that's a pretty horrible, scarring thing to have happen. I would also feel very bad. Like if we were doing this podcast and I killed you by accident, I think
I'd feel bad.
I would stop podcasting for at least a month.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, I mean, this movie is talked about in, you know, what like the worst on-set accidents of all time in film.
Mm-hmm.
This is up there with the Twilight Zone, the movie accident. For anybody that doesn't know, that was a helicopter crash on set.
Just landed on 3 people.
It landed on 3 people.
Decapitated someone.
Yeah, it decapitated the male actor, and then it killed the 2 child actors that were doing that scene.
Yeah, that were there illegally.
And Twilight Zone, the movie, is the reason why like any sort of safety standards are in films now is because of what happened on that set. And then the more recent example is Rust, which is not out yet, but apparently is still coming out, and that's with Alec Baldwin with a similar situation where he was given what's called a hot gun, so a gun that had like a round in it, and he did not know it was loaded. And I think it was like a scene where he was like shooting at the camera basically, and he shot the director and the cinematographer and killed the cinematographer.
Yep. You would think that Hollywood would learn, like after any of these accidents, they should just develop the technology for better looking blanks, better looking fake bullets. There's really no need for any gun in a movie to be a functional gun that can shoot bullets.
Yeah, I was seeing that for the remake that's coming out this weekend, they didn't have any real guns on set ever. They had all prop guns and fake guns that just had like the trigger that moved.
Yeah.
They did everything in post.
Yeah, see, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
I feel like the only, like, I can understand the John Wick movies, right? Because the John Wick movies are all about being, like, accurate with weapons. And if you've seen the behind the scenes, like, Keanu Reeves is, like, basically, like, military trained for that role.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he knows those guns inside and out. That I feel like that's okay. And obviously those guys are, like, super, like, detailed on making sure, like, those sets are safe.
Yeah, Chad Stahelski probably has reasons.
Yeah, like they've got that shit down. Like a normal movie set, I don't understand why you need a real gun. I agree, because on the gun end of things, you're probably doing CGI muzzle flashes anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
And on the person side of things, like you just give them a squib, right?
Yep.
Or you do. See, for anybody that doesn't know what a squib is, it's basically like a little blood packet that you put on your under your clothes or whatever, and it just like bursts a little hole on you. It hurts a little bit, but it gives like the realistic look of you being shot.
I imagine it's like getting hit with a paintball. Like you need enough explosive force for this thing to burst.
Yeah.
But that's it.
But you're not like actually getting injured or anything.
Right. Yeah, no. I think, and that is what this movie is like largely famous for, is that death. And I would say that death, in addition to the content of this film, the fact that someone died on it definitely piqued the interest of a lot of the more macabre audiences.
Yeah, because because it's also the fact that this movie is about getting vengeance for somebody's death.
Yeah.
Like it's all like woven into the movie. It's so like dark.
Right. So the guy who wrote the comic book, James O'Barr, who wrote the comic, he wrote the comic after his fiance died. He was grieving and he had a lot of anger about it. So he wrote this comic about like a revenant coming back to life and getting revenge because of someone else's death. He said that Brandon Lee's death on the set of his movie, which he was pretty heavily involved in.
Yes, he was.
In a writing capacity and a producing capacity. He said that Brandon Lee's death was like his fiance dying all over again.
This is literally the worst possible outcome of this.
He said that he regretted writing the comic ever at all in the first place, which is very sad.
I mean, this has to be the ultimate life imitates art ever for a film.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's very sad. And we'll talk about, whether or not this movie is even worth it.
Yeah, I was watching some behind the scenes, and I do feel really bad, looking back on him. Brandon Lee seems like a really articulate guy, he's really well spoken, and he was a pretty good looking guy too, and he's half white, half Asian. He looks like a white guy, and he looks like somebody that would have become a movie star.
Yeah, he would have had a career, and
this was a jumping off point for him, basically. And yeah, you can kind of feel the parallels a little bit with this and Heath Ledger's Joker performance a little bit, where it's posthumously you look and you go, wow, that was a really good performance.
Yeah,
I really do think his performance is probably the best part of the movie. It's not just that he's emo and he's angry and he's going around killing the guys. He's he's very talky to the people he's killing too. It's very theatrical, stage theater type acting, where he's not just going in there and killing them. He's going to talk to you about why he's going to kill you and what lessons he wants you to learn from this.
Yeah, it's good. It's interesting to watch, and you can tell he's giving it his all. Yeah, it just must suck. He must have had reservations going into this field, because his dad died on set too, and then for the same thing to happen to him, but in a freak accident, that's awful. And he has the juice in a lot of ways. We liked his performance. He lost 20 pounds for this role so that he could get absolutely ripped looking. And he has a martial arts background as well. So he would have probably become a pretty big action star like his father.
He was 28.
Okay, so younger than us. Weird to think about.
Yeah, very weird to think about.
The Crow, at the very least, he left behind a pretty big legacy because of this movie. There's a haunting aspect of it, but it's also just a memorable performance to go out on, I guess. There was debates with the studios whether they were going to continue finishing this movie. Like I said, Brandon Lee only had 3 days left, but they still had some other stuff to shoot. They took a break to rewrite the script a little bit, and then they got $8 million more to go finish everything up.
I think it was the right decision to finish the film.
Yeah, I think so too. I think you just have to ask, what would Brandon Lee have wanted? And he probably would have wanted the film to get made.
Shit, might as well.
Yeah, he wants everyone that he worked with to get paid and for his final performance to be seen by people. So, yeah, it did end up getting finished. Its final budget was $23 million, and it made $94 million. So it was a box office success, and it had 4 sequels.
Yeah, all the sequels are bad, which is interesting because the idea of The Crow feels like it's something that you could mold around really any sort of revenge story you'd want. And it seems they were just never able to get it to stick ever in any of those sequels.
Yeah, I think the first sequel may have gone to theaters, and then the other 2 were direct to video. There was also a TV series that I think was also not critically or financially successful. Yeah, with The Crow and the comic that it's based on, The Crow is a mantle that gets passed down. Or really, the character's not even called The Crow. The Crow is The Crow. But every sequel to this in the comics and the movies, it's just a new guy is the Crow. So they should be able to mine stories from this forever, because it's just, hey, what if you were murdered and then you came back to life to hunt down the people who hurt you? And that's a great concept.
Yeah, why do you think this is a film that they've been trying to get remade for so long? So the one that's coming out this weekend, the production of this film dates back to 2008, which is a long ass time.
Yeah.
And if you look at the list of actors, because we're always talking about the what if, this guy was almost cast in this role. I mean, the list of actors that were rumored for the Crow role, it was originally Mark Wahlberg was the first one they were looking at for the Crow. And then it was later Bradley Cooper, There was rumors of Channing Tatum and Ryan Gosling, possibly James McAvoy. The more recent one that I had saw, well, yeah, Alexander Skarsgård was in talks at one point. Now it's Bill Skarsgård.
Just switch Skarsgård, brother.
In 2013, Luke Evans was the one that they were mainly looking at. In 2013, it was reported that Norman Reedus was going to be the Crow and that Kristen Stewart was going to be playing Shelley.
That would have been pretty good.
Was it 2015? They were looking at Sam Witwer, who is a voice actor, mostly known for like Star Wars voices.
Nah, he was in a sci-fi series on the Sci-Fi Network.
Let's see. Nicholas Hoult was another name in 2015. And then where is it? Jason Momoa is the one that I mostly knew about. Jason Momoa was like actually signed up for the script. And what was this? This is in 2017. And him and the director that was on board for that, like, they just couldn't get, I don't know, there's creative differences with Sony. Sony Pictures was doing distribution at the time. And they couldn't get something figured out. And I guess they just left it.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, I mean, I think what it is it's a really easy like vehicle for when you have an action star on hand and you want franchise potential. So this thing, you know, it made its money back and more. You know, it made its budget back over 3 times the amount in spite of all the troubled production. And then it did get 3 sequels. So it was definitely a success, even if those sequels were straight to DVD. They had to have been making money because they kept making them.
It is a tough look that, yeah, it looks like this remake's not getting marketed at all.
No, I mean, yeah, it just has to be bad.
And it has a $50 million budget, reportedly, which is, feels kind of high.
Yeah, I think, well, it depends on how you look at it. If you look at it as this is a superhero movie based on a comic, then that's not that high. But if you look at it as this is a remake of a cult classic from the 90s, then that's very high. So The Crow is not like a franchise that is a super smash hit the way that any given Marvel series is. The Crow comics have been like sporadically published since 1989, but every Crow comic is just about a different guy. And there's not really much continuity between them, and the original writer doesn't really work on them because, again, he regrets ever making the comic.
Is it like different publishers that do it every time, or is there like one comic company that owns like the rights to it?
Yeah, so the rights have been sold and resold a few times. So every time it goes to a new publisher, they'll make up a new Crow and kind of hope that people latch onto it. I read a couple the day after we watched the movie. I read one where a Crow was an altar boy at the Vatican and someone terrorist attacked the Vatican and he had to hunt them down. But then it turned out that his priest was the one behind it and he had to get revenge. And then I read another one that was really interesting. It was about this little girl who got murdered and then she comes back as the Crow, but she doesn't get revenge for herself because she's 5. She goes to like the police officer that was working the case and helps him solve the case. And then that police officer beats up the bad guy. That one was pretty cool, but...
Which we see a little bit in the movie.
Yes, there is a police officer character, and that is one of the main relationships is between that cop and the Crow.
Yeah, he's played by Ernie Hudson from Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
He looks like a cop. He plays a cop pretty well.
Yeah.
A cop that likes to hang out at a hot dog stand.
I think this movie did an okay job giving us like other characters outside of the Crow, you know, non-supernatural
they don't
characters.
feel like they're weighing things down too much. They had the little girl, Sarah, and her mom, Darla, who's a stripper.
Yeah.
Like a prostitute.
And Sarah was friends with Eric Draven before he died. And so she helps him and he helps her. She gets kidnapped at one point.
Helps get her mom like off of drugs, like give her mom a wake up call.
Yeah, which was cool. There's a lot of elements in this movie that I really, really like, but my overall feelings we'll talk about soon.
Well, what was the letterbox score that you gave this?
I gave this
like a 3.
I gave it a 3, and you gave it what?
I gave it a 2.
A 2.
I don't think like overall it's that good of a movie. I think it's a movie that's really difficult to try to like look at it with any sort of like objectivity because like you know what happened with this movie.
Yeah.
And so you watch it and then like every single scene that you're watching him, you're going, this guy was murdered on set.
Mm-hmm.
and you're just watching him, it's a little eerie.
Yeah, that is the feeling you get while watching this. Like, it's a movie that's supposed to be a little bit like spooky, and then it just is spooky because someone died while making it.
Yeah, it's like the film's haunted.
So that's about all we need to talk about for what this movie is and what happened during making it. Let's talk about how people like this. So this movie has an 86% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, unusually high Rotten Tomatoes score.
An incredibly high score for like a 90s superhero film. Rolling Stone called it a dazzling fever dream of a movie. Roger Ebert called it a stunning work of visual style. And then it's got a 3.7 on Letterboxd. So people like this movie. Even before it became kind of a cult classic, this got good reviews upon its release. Dylan, what do you think? Is this overrated or underrated at a 3.7?
I would say it's definitely overrated with scores that high. I do respect the aesthetic, and I think mostly people focus on the aesthetic and Brandon Lee's performance. Though generally speaking, like, this is just a revenge movie, and they're kind of stuck having to stretch out this plot thread throughout an entire film. So you're basically like, all right, how many goons were in the group that killed him and his girlfriend?
Right.
What do we got, like 4, 5, 6 guys? Okay, we'll just do like a series of sequences where he takes these guys out. The movie also kind of lacks stakes, which is something you want to see out of a superhero film, especially like a ground level superhero like this. You want him to feel a little bit fallible, right? And he is functionally invincible. He gets he gets shot with so many bullets in this movie, which is, again, very ironic and not in a good way. He gets shot a shitload in this movie, and he's completely invincible because he's the Crow. The Crow can't be damaged. He has cheat codes on, except for the Crow. We didn't talk about this, but the physical Crow that is like following him around. If the Crow gets killed, he can also get killed.
Yeah.
And so the Crow gets like injured near the end of the movie, and that immediately makes him injurable, which is kind of like an interesting weakness, but not really.
Yeah, and they don't do too much with it.
And that's like, he has no superpowers. His superpowers are that he doesn't die to bullets, basically.
I mean, that's a good power.
It's a good power to have, but it's kind of boring, like when stretched over an entire movie.
Yeah.
And so I think overall, yeah, the movie is just a little boring, though. If you know all of the backstory about the film, that's what makes it interesting. It's tough. Like, if you showed this movie to a group of people that knew none of the backstory of it, what would they think of it? They probably think it's like an okay superhero film from the 90s.
Yeah, I think most of my friends would be like, this is just a bad movie.
Like, how many people do you think watched this movie and aren't aware that Brandon Lee was killed when making it?
Today? Not a lot.
Yeah.
Maybe at the time. I'm sure at the time it was probably like a big news story, but not everyone read the news and the internet.
You also got to imagine that critics at that time were probably judging it on a curve a little bit.
I would think so, yeah.
It's just like any sort of posthumous performance that you're watching from an actor.
Yeah, I don't think Heath Ledger would have gotten an Oscar nomination if he was still alive.
He won the Oscar.
I don't think he would have gotten
playing the Joker.
I don't even think he would have gotten a nomination if he hadn't died. So yeah, I think critics and people involved in Hollywood, they do, give you a little bit more flowers if you die, which I think makes sense and is probably deserved.
It's fine. What would be the argument for this film being underrated, do you think?
Just that I think nowadays, like, there's definitely an audience for this movie that hasn't seen it. Like, I hadn't seen it, and I could definitely see this appealing to me if I was younger. But there are people, like today's metalheads and punks, etc., I think they would find a lot to like in here, both aesthetically and content-wise, that they would dig into and get a lot out of. It's got an interesting story. It's a simple revenge tale, but I think that Brandon Lee's performance and then his relationship with Sarah and Ernie Hudson, it kind of grounds it a little bit. So there's a more human side to this otherwise just stupid, violent movie. So there's more to it than just what's on the surface and the stuff that people remember. And it's just kind of got a lot of just badass sequences and moments. And like I said before, it's ahead of its time in a lot of ways. When we were watching it, there's a part where like he goes to a 90s rave. It's like a punk rave. And we were like, yep, this is the thing you need in every 90s movie.
This is the opening scene of Blade right
It's
here.
the opening scene of Blade, but this came out like
It's 2 years before.
2 years before Blade. Like a lot of the stuff that we credit Blade with, this actually did it first. Like this did so many things first. Like I said, the performance kind of reminds me a little bit of Heath Ledger's Joker, but this guy did it 14 years before Heath Ledger did. It's got the revenge tale elements that make John Wick such a success, but this is obviously way before that. Obviously a huge influence on John Wick. Brandon Lee's stunt double went on to build that franchise out. So this thing, hugely influential, kind of got its flowers at the time, but now I think people only view it as like this cult classic that's like only beloved within certain subcultures, when I think it has a lot of appeal, and I think modern audiences could really connect to this.
It's funny because, yeah, cult classic is usually a term attributed to films that
flopped.
Yeah, that flopped either financially or critically, which this film did neither.
Yeah. So this should just be a classic, but I think
this just be considered a good movie that came out in the 90s.
But I think people consider this a cult classic because its legacy is kind of like, this is a good movie.
Because the lead actor was killed on set.
Yeah.
And also, I think the aesthetic is definitely part of it. The city that they craft in this film, it's not just like they shot it in Detroit or something like that. It's clear that they used a lot of sets of these like dark, dreary, like rundown streets, and everything looks ugly and everything looks trashed.
Yeah, and the wides are minis, as you pointed out earlier.
Yeah, a lot of miniature shots of the skyline.
Yeah,
a lot of work
it looks
put
great
into crafting. It reminds me a lot of what Tim Burton did to create Gotham.
Yeah,
in that '89 Batman movie.
Yeah, I would agree with that. This is very much like the '90s grunge version of like that Batman aesthetic. It's cool. It looks cool. You feel really immersed in it while you're watching it. So that's the argument for underrated.
Yeah. Do you actually think it's underrated or
no? I think this movie is not bad, but I think a lot of it is kind of grating and repetitive, like the flashback sequences, because it's just like they're strobe lighting the flashbacks at you and you don't really know what's going on, and you're like, ugh. This is annoying.
This movie doesn't open very well, and it's possible that, you know, it was a lot more streamlined in earlier versions of the film.
Yeah, definitely.
And they kind of had to make it work there. I'll give them that.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. You know, I don't actually even remember like specific moments that were cool. I remember watching it and being like, okay, this is cool. This action sequence is cool, but I couldn't like point anyone out right now the way I could with like a John Wick movie where you're like, oh, this scene where he's at the club is so good, or the scene where he's falling down the stairs forever in Paris is really good.
Yeah, there's nothing this movie does particularly incredibly, and if you're going to make like any sort of argument for this film is underappreciated or something like that, you'd have to talk about how influential it was for other films that came out in the 90s that are now more popular and more rewatchable, because I don't think this film is rewatchable at all, honestly.
Yeah, I think it is overall a good movie. Definitely worth watching once. 86% on Rotten Tomatoes is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, just to see Brandon Lee's performance, because he's a young actor who we never got to see blow up.
Yeah, it really is a shame. Yeah, I would have liked to see more.
It's like one of those like ultimate what ifs in Hollywood. He's kind of like Hollywood's. There's this guy. I think he was drafted in like the late 80s. His name was Len Bias. He was drafted in the NBA. And he was considered this like generational, like all-time great college basketball player. And I think he was drafted like number 2 overall or something like that to the Celtics. And the night that he got drafted, he died of a cocaine overdose.
Yeah, he did cocaine and died. Yeah, they came to our school and did an assembly about it.
Yeah, he's like one of the all-time what ifs. And Brandon Lee's like kind of like that, the movie version of that. It's this actor that died like right before he was going to become a thing.
Yep, it's a shame.
So yeah, R.I.P. Brandon Lee, R.I.P. Bruce Lee. I think they're buried next to each other.
That's nice.
So yeah, I don't think this is going to be the last Alex Proyas film that we do either, because I really want to do. I'd like to do iRobot.
Yeah, I do too, because we both like that movie, right?
I do like iRobot. I think it's actually good.
Yeah, we're diehard fans of iRobot. It's crazy that this has an 86%, and I can't imagine what iRobot has, but I imagine it's spectacularly lower.
It's probably like in the 60s, if I had to guess.
I'm gonna look it up now. This is a sneak preview of our iRobot episode.
Live. So if we're talking about like random other movies right now, did you see the new trailer for Megalopolis that came out today?
I watched part of it.
Well, for anybody that hasn't seen it, the opening of this is Francis Ford Coppola's new movie that's coming out in September. We'll definitely do a Godfather episode. We might also do a Francis Ford Coppola episode, just him on his own, because he's such a unique director. Mm-hmm. But the trailer opens with reviews or snippets of reviews from his previous films, like shit talking them. So people saying like Godfather wasn't really good or Apocalypse Now wasn't very good. And now it's come out that those quotes are like made up.
Yeah, they never existed.
Crazy. This is the craziest thing I've ever seen.
It's a bold strategy. I read one theory that just said a marketing intern just typed in negative reviews of The Godfather into ChatGPT, copied and pasted them into a form, and then left for the day, and no one checked.
Yeah, because not only were they like quotes of reviews, they also attributed the quotes to
real people,
to real critics and real publications. And I believe like almost all of those critics are dead now.
Yeah, but one of them came out and said, hey, I never said that.
Yeah.
You can look at my review.
Exactly. Well, people were pulling up the reviews because we have the internet now. You can just pull up old reviews of stuff. Like Roger Ebert, you can look at all of his old reviews. One of them was a real quote, but it was from a review of the 1989 Batman movie, not Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula.
So weird.
Weird. Yeah. They actually had, I think they pulled that trailer. Like,
oh, really?
Yeah, it's not online anymore.
That's a shame because I thought maybe they did it on purpose. It's really funny. iRobot has a 57%, which I think is rotten, but I'm not sure. Yeah. So this movie,
I just don't understand.
The Crow is considered fresh and iRobot is considered rotten, which we're going to have to talk about.
The Crow is 30 percentage points higher on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah. Yep.
Are you going to see the Crow remake in theaters, you think?
I'm not sure because I don't...
A lot of seats open when I bought my tickets today for this.
I don't have time like tomorrow or Friday probably. And then I don't know how much longer this thing's going to be in theaters. Also, there's another movie that came out. It's called like Blink Twice or something.
Yeah.
I think the trailer for that looks really good.
Yeah, that's also not getting great reviews for what I saw.
That's okay. It looked interesting to me, more interesting than...
I think it's Zoe Kravitz. I think she's directing it and starring in it.
Yep. And Channing Tatum's kind of like the main star. He's the big face on the posters.
I saw Amazon Studios came out with like a whole disclaimer today about the film.
About Blink Twice?
Yeah, cool. Because they were like, this film includes sequences of sexual assault. Oh. You know, trigger warning, which is good. It's a good thing that they did that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a more useful thing to have than just like the G to R rating. Like, you should tell people if there are specifically triggering things in the film. But yeah, so that's our opinions on movies that are coming out, and iRobot and The Crow from 1994. So check it out if you haven't seen it before.
Definitely watch it at least once. Absolutely. I think it was like on Paramount Plus. It's pretty easy to find online. The 4K rip it was a 4K remaster that we watched on streaming. It looked good.
It did look good, yeah. And it was a good time watching it. So, yeah, check it out. But that's going to be it for us this week at the Over Under podcast. Thank you for listening. You can check us out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you want to just be listening to us. If you want to see our faces as we discuss these things, you can watch us on YouTube. If you want to talk about these things with us, you can join our Discord and see the reviews we give movies in real time. Every time we finish a movie, Dylan and I both go on our phones and enter our Letterboxd reviews.
Yeah, I've been trying to like stay on top of that. Just like log my Letterboxd like immediately every time I watch a movie.
Yep.
I do it in theaters now, like when everybody else is like leaving, and so I'm not like stuck like walking down the steps with everybody. Like,
yeah,
hop on that Letterboxd app.
That's kind of funny. I am on Letterboxd on the escalator down from the movie theater. I don't sit in the theater and do it. I'm with everyone else, and then I'm like looking at them to see if they're watching me write my review. And then what else?
You're looking around to see if there's like
if there's like a hot babe that is on Letterboxd, and I could be like, hey, what's your handle on there? Hey, look at my profile picture on Letterboxd.
Hey, I have a movie podcast.
I have a movie podcast. Are you on AMC A List? Check out.
Where are you parked at?
Check out AMC A List. We got to save movie theaters, so yeah, do that. Join our Patreon. We also got to save me and Dylan, and yeah, that's it, right? You can follow us on TikTok if you want.
Yep. Come hang out.
Yeah, just follow us wherever and come hang out. But that's gonna be it. Thank you for watching, and we will see you at the movies. Bye.
See ya.